Oh, June 24th. That's soon, isn't it? Yeah, I think Deltarune came earlier than most of us were expecting, whether you thought it would come out in late summer or if you were denying that it would come out in 2026 altogether. So, here's what I'm doing. I'll be talking about my big predictions for Chapter 5, and I'll be putting them into a bingo board so that when I play Chapter 5 on release, I'll be able to see just how much I got right. So that means I have 25 predictions to fill 25 bingo spaces, right? Without further ado, let's begin. Alright, my first prediction. Free space. What? Every bingo board has to have them, right? I don't know. If you want the free space to be a real prediction, just have it be something like Chris will have 240 HP during at least some of the chapter. Well, this obviously wasn't shown in the trailer. Toby confirmed that the trailer lacks some of the most trailerable moments, and he tried to keep it mostly spoiler-free, so I think that Noelle being a party member is still quite likely. Plus, she is shown walking behind Chris and Susie in the festival, similar to the study group in Chapter 4, and she also has reactions to various items from Chapters 3 and 4 coded in, suggesting that she will be able to react to them in-game. This is another thing that wasn't really suggested in the trailer, but is still possible. If Chapter 4 had multiple Dark Worlds of mostly the same theme, I think that having a festival Dark World would be a good way to showcase the personalities of various festival-related objects, although it would probably have to be indoors. Maybe somewhere like a storage closet in Town Hall, or maybe a place like Sans' shop is being used to store festival supplies. I'm not too sure about this one. Very likely. The knight seems to ore farm every chance that it gets, and it's very likely that it will appear in Chapter 5. Although Asgore might take center stage, since the main reason that the knight got so much in Chapter 4 was because there was no main antagonist of that chapter other than itself. This was also another reason that I think multiple Dark Worlds might work. One Dark World has the knight front and center, and the other has Asgore. I'm pretty sure that this attack being shown in the trailer implies that we will fight the Cyan Flower, since it isn't just any normal Flowey attack, but specifically the attack used by the Cyan Soul. However, I've seen a lot of people suggest that this is the secret boss, which I find less likely. For one, the pattern of secret bosses often being fought when Chris is alone doesn't hold up that well, since it only applies to weird routes spammed in Neo and Eram, and only the normal spammed in Neo quest and the sword route involve Chris often being alone. This isn't really a thing with a Jevil, the Knight, or Gerson. Plus, there are normal bosses that you fight with only Chris as well, like regular Spampton and the Mikes if you so choose. I suspect that this fight is a normal boss, either against the Cyan Flower or perhaps against multiple soul-colored flowers at once. In my opinion, the Chapter 4 Castletown segment leaves a lot to be desired. Only one dojo fight isn't good, and while TV Studio is absolutely the highlight, it falls flat in some ways too, since I can't understand why they would port the rhythm game, but not the Cooking or Susie Zilla games, and while a rancher having a joke about it not being included just adds insult to injury. However, the fight against Trashy, Orbsman Ball, and Super Noobert is likely a dojo fight, which builds up my hope for the dojo this chapter. Also, we might be able to come back to Castletown after the Flower King Dark World, since Malleus implies that we need to bring a Master of Bread to Castletown to get more fusion items, and Chapter 5 is fairly associated with wheat. I haven't been subtle about my preferred knight candidate in the past. I think that Des is the knight, and in Chapter 5 we will see even more Death Knight evidence. If the evidence for another knight candidate like Carol starts to outweigh existing Death Knight evidence, perhaps my preferred knight candidate will change. Speaking of which, this leads pretty well into my next prediction. It is in my opinion that Carol's being set up as a red herring knight candidate for casual players. If this is true, I could totally see her becoming a red herring for Deltarune characters as well, mainly Susie, since Chris probably already knows who the knight is, and Rousey can't go to the light world. I think that there could be some moment in the chapter where Susie pieces together various things connecting the knight and Carol. Man, this sucks. We can't get into their house to get that code now with all the people around here. I was so close to getting it yesterday too. If only Noelle's mom hadn't... Crits, holy shit! I think that Azrael coming home from college for the town's annual festival is a pretty good guess as to when he might show up. I think it would make a pretty good opening to the chapter, and his return might also be a part of Asgore's motivations later in the chapter. Another thing I thought of that could connect to this is that Chapter 5 soundtrack will supposedly be full of spoilers, and having one of the first songs in the chapter having Your Best Friend or his theme motifs would certainly line up with that. Chapter 5 was introduced to us by Gerson as the Field of Pink and Gold. I think Friend is going to be irrelevant. How? I'm not sure. I could see arguments for normal boss, secret boss, and even final boss, although I think I might want to go with normal boss, since final boss seems something more like Asgore, if we want to believe the final naming of the prophecy, since Toby hasn't been too subtle about final bosses in the past, and Friend seems like it might be a bit too important to not be mandatory, given how much it appears in past chapters. Plus, a non-final boss can still absolutely be an important character. However, I can still see any of these working, so this prediction doesn't specify what kind of boss Friend would have to be for it to be correct. They're going on a date. Chris is also there. I don't really see how this couldn't happen. I guess the only reason this one isn't in free space territory is because something could happen to interrupt the epic Suzel moments, like a dark world getting opened out of nowhere, or Carol burning down Ices. Why did I put that in the script? There's been a lot of talk as to who might create the Flower King Dark Fountain recently, right? Is it Asgore? The Knight? Carol? Alphys? I think it's still probably Asgore. He seems to know a lot more about Dark Fountains than most other characters, probably as a Black Shard, and appears to be planning something drastic in Chapter 4. Speaking of which, there's something interesting that I noticed about what Asgore is planning. Listen to this quote from him. "And this time she'll have to believe me, they all will." Yeah, I don't know about you, but this makes me think that Asgore might end up bringing multiple people into the Dark World with him. Who? Well, Toriel and Azriel are likely, I suppose. Toriel was asleep during Chapter 3, so I guess I would count her appearance in another Dark World as new if she's awake this time. Carol's a pretty good guess too. Also, Mad Mew Mew, she seems to have a thing for Asgore, and she's themed after an anime cat girl. She'd fit right in. Of course, I suppose there's always the chance that no new Lightners besides Asgore end up in the Dark World, and an even smaller chance that Asgore just won't be in the Dark World, but that's reaching tricky Tony level theorizing, so let's not go there. I admit, until very recently, I wasn't too big on the idea. While in the Chapter 2 era, the majority of the fandom held the idea that nothing big would happen until very late in the game, this idea seems to have flipped on its head after Chapter 3 and 4 came out, and now it seems like everyone thinks everything major will happen in Chapter 5, and this just seemed like a byproduct of that. However, I feel like I have to give this some credit because a very large amount of sun going down in Chapter 5 imagery. This seems a lot more likely now, even if I don't buy into it 100%. Okay, in Chapter 2, there's this one Virokun in Castletown who I'm pretty sure implies that Noelle's going to come to Castletown later. Given how Noelle's in her Light World party, from what it seems, and Susie is kind of bad at keeping secrets, I could see Noelle in Castletown being likely, maybe after a Dark World segment where she realizes the Dark Worlds weren't a dream. In my opinion, if Toby didn't want us to connect Woody Theory to Chapter 5, he shouldn't have connected Cowboys to Asgore in a quiz, then connect Cowboys to Asgore elsewhere once the section the quiz was in was scrapped, and then make a reference to a floral cowboy bath curtain for good measure. Somehow, despite the Japanese theming, there are some minor things pointing to this in recent Chapter 5 teasers as well, such as the plateaus, which some have described as Western Canyons, shown at the end of the Chapter 5 trailer in the background, and a sprite of a Floridan that seems to be wearing a conductor-like hat and operating a lever, which makes me think that it's working on a train. I don't know about you, but when I think of trains, the Wild West comes to mind a lot sooner than Japan. Also, Asgore literally has an old TV in his room. What would he watch with it? Perhaps old tapes of his favorite cowboy show? Overall, this is still my favorite Chapter 5 secret boss candidate, since it has smoking guns that a lot of others lack. Let's talk about another secret boss candidate. From what I understand, Apple Girlington is like Toby Fox's old Toho OC. A lot of the evidence presented in the series didn't really resonate with me the same way that Woody Theory did, but it got a pretty big boost from the Japan-themed Dark World that we've seen. Other than that, the apple part fits in with the plant themes, although I don't seem to recall seeing any apples in Asgore's shop, and there is speculation that a mystery guest designer for Chapter 5 may be Zune, the creator of Toho. Since I think this is less evidence than Woody Theory, I'll go easy on this one. I will only mark off the Woody Theory space if the secret boss is cowboy themed, but I will mark this one off as long as there is a character who is suitably Apple Girlington themed. They don't have to be a secret boss. This one is my sleeper pick for the Chapter 5 secret boss, just because it seems interesting and I wonder what it could become in the Dark World. Like Apple Girlington, as long as a conspiracy board becomes something in the Dark World, the space gets marked off. The prophecy panel about Asgore is labeled as Boss 3 in the files. In the past, the only Deltarune boss that Toby didn't really tease that much was the Titan, since Queen and Tenna were both name-dropped before the chapter's release, and King was in the chapter where basically nothing was teased. However, maybe it isn't Asgore. That Boss 3 could perhaps be referring to the flower that Asgore is holding. Alternatively, the Titan, the final boss of Chapter 4, was shown at the end of the Chapters 3 and 4 trailer, so maybe the big thing that looks like a sun shown at the end of the Chapter 5 trailer is the real boss? I think I'm less keen on this one than Asgore main boss, but it's still a very real possibility. I guess there are some ways that both of these could be true, like if Asgore is seen creating the large sun-like thing. If that ends up being the case, I guess I could mark off both of these, as weird as that sounds. The Titan uses various kinds of Titan spawn as attacks, yet we only get to face one kind of Titan spawn in battle. Perhaps we'll end up fighting more. Some of the places shown in the Chapter 5 trailer do look pretty dark, which, as we know from Chapter 4, is where Titan spawn tend to hang out. However, if we do fight them later, it might be in a later chapter, perhaps after the roaring begins. I did some calculations for the damage that this guy does in one of the teaser screenshots. I think that there's a very high chance that this enemy has an attack stat of 19. I will not elaborate on this right now. I think that this is far more likely than any other Inferno candidate. Asgore has fire magic in Undertale, and Undyne gets her Undertale magic in the Dark World. Asgore also has a reason to be jealous, that being Sans befriending Toriel and getting in the way of his plans to get his family back together. And of course, Asgore has a flower shop. That's probably going to be the vast garden in question. I would prefer Asgore causing the Inferno of jealousy over other candidates like Ralze or Caddy. One of the translation teasers posted by Toby Fox looks like it shows Chris interacting with old pictures, perhaps? I think that this could end up being an important part of the chapter, showing us a look into Chris's past. Hey, we might even finally get a full desk design reveal. Well, maybe. And finally, I hope so. I've been waiting over a year for it now. Okay, here it is, my finished bingo board. When Chapter 5 comes out, I'll be streaming it, starting a little bit after 11 a.m. Eastern Time, and I'll probably have this bingo board on my desk while I'm playing. It would mean a lot if you watched the stream live. I know that even though my channel has grown a lot in the past year, it's still pretty small, so I guess I'm not expecting to get that many people here, but think of it this way, I'll probably get to respond to just about any chat message I get. Unless, of course, my stream is far bigger than expected, or the more likely option, barely anyone shows up. But no matter how many people show up, I still plan to stream it live to catch my reactions. Subscribe if you're interested, and comment any predictions you have, well, in the comments. Where else would you comment?